For a while now, I've wondered what's going on with mainstream media's reporting of esports and gaming, constantly seeing it portrayed in a negative light and harming the industry from gaining popularity. Today, we're going to explore some of the reasons for the disparity in reporting and opinion from the UK public. Before we go into the research part, I think it's valuable to explain my current position on this matter. Since getting involved in esports, I've noticed that mainstream media hasn't really been treated with the same respect that you get from traditional sports like football or basketball. This is a sentiment I found shared across the esports community in polls I've conducted. The esports industry being worth nearly £2 million within the UK and billions worldwide, it seems odd to me that there's not really a rush from the mainstream media to take a piece of the action. It's especially confusing to me as influential figures trying to take down an industry that's grown as fast as esports and gaming is. Maybe they see it as a threat to their own industries. Shown on screen now are the top mainstream media sites, which are what I'm going to be referring to throughout this video. There are other ones, of course. The way articles and headlines are worded can significantly change the way an audience perceives the bias of an article. This may not be how everyone sees it, but here's an example of a positive and negative headline. For example, let's take this article titled "Video Game Coaching Like Being a Football Manager." This can be seen as negative because it uses like to compare it to a more successful industry, a more successful traditional sport. And this can give those glancing at it the idea that esports is beneath them or beneath the industry it's being compared to. In a positive headline, however, such as the UK's first professional women's esports tournament, it shows that there's something good and progressive about the esports industry, and it's being directly mentioned without being compared to anything else. The spectrum of content is very broad, with this article from the BBC showing, in my opinion, a very good depiction of esports in the context of traditional sports. It allows the reader to see how investing in esports can be a positive use of time, such as giving people skills usable in multiple other industries and moving towards traditional sports. But while looking around for some positive news around esports from mainstream media, I found many articles that seem somewhat negative or not true to esports as someone in industry. So many examples I can show you, but here's a selection of some of them. They all show esports in a light that either makes esports not seem like a profitable or worthwhile industry, or make it seem like it's just an escape avenue without a full industry behind it. It's a sentiment like this that really turns a lot of the population away from supporting esports.
The BBC, they had some local news, they had the Telegraph, so some quite big outlets here. Their coverage focused on elements like the prize pool and how novel it was that people were competing in video games for money, that kind of surface level coverage.
The esports community in general does agree with the statement that esports coverage from mainstream media in the UK isn't positive most of the time, but this could be because they focus on neutral reporting as required by the editing policies of most of these sites within the UK, and also within regulations from bodies such as Ofcom, which is the UK's media regulator. I couldn't find any up-to-date numbers on the people who actively watch esports. It was about 7% of the UK population in 2017, and younger generations are tending to lean towards more internet-based entertainment outlets such as esports productions, and therefore more likely esports articles as well. So this number of esports viewers is likely to have increased in the last 8 to 9 years. This number has dropped slightly since the peak of the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. It is still a growing industry with more and more events being hosted worldwide and prize pools also increasing alongside it. Surely there's mainstream media publications that are harming themselves in the long term by not getting their practice with esports journalism now while it's still a growing industry. I attempted to retrieve some statistics from the BBC by using a Freedom of Information request, which would have told me how many viewers they have for their esports news. They did, however, deny this request. Now, this could just be me overthinking it, but maybe they're scared of that information going public because it exposes a bias within their reporting. Just something to think about. While I can't tell you the viewing figures for esports content, I'll use the assumption it's pretty low and not pushed very well, which will inevitably be leading to a lack of knowledge within the population outside of the esports industry. Now, I don't want to be all down about the coverage of esports. There are some aspects that allow easy access to a large amount of the population, such as when the BBC did their coverage of the Fortnite World Cup in 2019 or the League of Legends World's Grand Finals at the end of 2024. This does lead to the point where I have to talk about how disappointing it feels reading or watching coverage that mainstream media outlets are covering on developments in esports education, where it's often presented as an industry that only people who struggle with typical education can pursue without showing, again, as I said already, the full industry behind it.
And then you have the
Yeah.
challenge that esports has. It's like, how do you make esports look compelling? And how do you make education look compelling? Like when you're filming someone getting an education, is it someone sitting in a classroom raising a hand? In esports, how do you film that? It's why if you look at all the esports promotional stuff, it's always people lifting trophies and people screaming from behind, uh, from behind screens, and it's like that's really such a tiny part of what goes on in this industry.
I couldn't make this video without talking about the effect that influential figures from other industries have on the esports industry. In a recent and quite widely talked about example within the esports community itself, Gareth Southgate, the ex-coach of the English national football team, described gaming as damaging to young people in the same way that you'd talk about pornography or gaming. In fact, used them within the same sentence. This, in my opinion, is just straight up false, as esports and gaming more generally can help to teach and develop a range of skills useful in many industries, from production to business and into further reaches. Put it into some perspective, if I were to criticize football in such a way, I believe I get significant backlash from multiple larger industries and be told I don't know what I'm talking about. So again, I must ask, why should a football coach be able to say so comfortably in front of national media that gaming is a problem when I was unable to find if he had any history within gaming or esports himself? UK culture also plays a part in the apparent lack of support for esports in the country. Quite a large amount of people within the UK population have attended in-person traditional sporting events, and there's even more that would like to go to an event but haven't been just yet, and that number's around 75%. And with there being such a heavy culture around wanting to watch sports in person, it's no surprise that there's a lack of any attention to esports when we have very few in-person events to be able to attend without having to go abroad. Now, there are some esports events that happen in person on LAN inside this country. For example, in the early months of 2025, there was the RLCS Major in Birmingham. And also, the League of Legends World Final at 2024 was also hosted in the UK at the O2 Arena in London. Wanting physical events isn't the only thing that the UK has a history of creating. We also often create on-screen talent for these events, both in traditional and esports.
We have a lot more access to kind of being visible talent in other spaces. So you'll notice like even there's a disproportionate amount of English casters on across all of esports. Like if you did like population proportional, and I think it is because a lot of that goes back to the old school traditional media standards of like the proper Queen's English comes across a bit better. It gives a different personality.
This follows on to create an environment where people studying esports or creating an esports background around the UK look for jobs elsewhere outside the country that are higher paying, and also appreciate the work more they do within a more general population. Looking at everything I've said so far in this video and everything I've researched to put this together, my opinion remains that mainstream media doesn't have esports' best interest in mind yet. But it probably isn't intentionally trying to harm the industry. There are certainly some influential figures who possibly see esports as a threat and a risk to their traditional sports, and therefore will try to bring it down in a way of protecting it instead of embracing it in a way to boost what they're already doing. But it does feel like esports is gaining some traction. It's not happening at a rate where we're going to be able to catch up with countries such as Korea and Japan and even the US, where they've got heavy esports investment within both education, grassroots, and going up to the pro level. So I've identified some of the issues that are plaguing mainstream media's coverage of esports. Let's suggest some ideas that could help to improve the situation within mainstream media. First off, more consideration needs to be made towards the headlines to make sure that the industry is taken seriously and it's not seen as having no future, or it's just some novel idea that's going to die within a few years. This could be achieved by journalists looking past the prize pools and at the huge teams of production, staff, and coaching behind every single event that happens. Esports education needs to have more realistic coverage of what students are actually doing on these BTEC and UAL courses to show that they learn a wide variety of cross-transferable skills and they're not just sat there gaming all day. And mainstream media should hire more people who have been through esports education or have a background in esports journalism instead of pushing them away to help assist in creating high-quality news stories that are likely to gain the interest of both the esports community and general UK population. So as I've discussed today, mainstream media has a long way to go before it becomes a reliable source of esports and gaming news. But it is, if slowly, heading in the right direction. I believe that once more students leave college and university with diplomas and degrees, they'll begin to fill the roles at these publications, which will improve their coverage significantly. That's going to be it for this video, and probably the last time I make a documentary style video again. But as I said at the beginning, my sources will be available in a link in the description below. But until next time, goodbye.